This is the NWO Sting, and you are listening to the Wrestling Epicenter.
You're listening to Interactive Wrestling Radio, featuring the Interactive Interview, courtesy of WrestlingEpicenter.com.
This is Sting, and you're listening to the Interactive Interview.
Welcome back to Interactive Wrestling Radio. On the Newsmaker line with me right now is a member of the original NWO. Of course, the NWO is going in the Hall of Fame this year. Wanted to have on as many NWO members as possible, and this guy was a part of the original NWO as it got started and really launched the angle that kind of drove the whole force of the NWO, Hogan and Sting. He was the NWO Sting, Jeff Farmer. Mr. Farmer, are you with me?
Yes, I am. How are you?
I'm doing great. It's a pleasure to have you on. Of course, we'll talk a little bit about, the legacy of the NWO, but I guess the first question I have to ask is, what have you been up to lately? It's been a while since your name was in the headlines.
Yeah, I retired a while back from wrestling and went back to school and got a master's at the University of Miami, and I work for the university. I make a few appearances every now and then, but not very many. And, my roots are in Japan, so I actually was there. I wrestled last year for Muda, and I think I'm going over there this year as well. But other than that, pretty much hung the boots up.
Oh, awesome. And I actually saw a picture of you. That's kind of what prompted me to ask you to do this. I saw a picture of you on Scott Norton's profile of you guys at a fan fest together, and I thought, well, I don't think I've ever spoken to you before. I've had the other Sting on, and I've had other members of the NWO on, but I've never had you on. So it's a pleasure to finally get you.
I'm kind of the obscure, a little of the obscure version, but no, it's a pleasure to be on your show.
It's a pleasure to have you on. How do you enjoy doing those fan fests? How do you enjoy meeting the fans?
I haven't done too many of those, to be honest with you. And a lot of them are, Scott, I'm good buddies with Scott, so he invited me to a couple, so I did a few, but I really haven't been to too many. But when I was in Tokyo recently, of course, the fans in Japan are amazing, and it was really nice to kind of touch base with some of the fans I hadn't, been in the ring in like 15 years. So it was a thrill that they're still kind of excited to see me get out there.
Very good. I do have a few questions for you about that NWO Japan and things like that. But before I get there, I have a strange question for you. I was reading up on this, doing my research, and it said on your Wikipedia page that you were in the dying days of the Global Wrestling Federation, which anybody who listens to me knows that that's one of my favorite federations of all time, and that building is a special place in my heart. I just can't remember ever seeing you there. When you were in Global, what did you work as?
Well, first of all, I have not really looked at that page, so I'm not sure about the accuracy of some of the information on there. They just people post stuff, so I have no idea. I wasn't in Global. I wasn't in that organization. I was with the IWF, which was Eddie Mansfield had in Orlando.
Yes.
I was not in Global, any kind of Global thing. So again, I don't know about the information that's on there. They had something else. I was Black Scorpion. I wasn't Black Scorpion, so I don't know, where they get their information, but, I don't really follow it that much. So I have no idea really what's on there. What kind of content is there?
Absolutely. And, I like I said, I used to introduce that question with, and let's put it through the is it real or is it not Wikipedia test. So I'm glad.
Yeah,
I'm glad we did
take all of that with, with some of it's a grain of salt. You just don't know who put the information up.
It's one of those things I read and I scratched my head. I'm like, I know I would remember him because I watched all that stuff, but I just didn't see him. Okay. All right. So back on track here. The first time you really made a huge impression on me was when you were in WCW under the Cobra name. And man, that was a great character and great persona. How did you enjoy playing the maybe Sylvester Stallone movie meets G.I. Joe version of Cobra?
That's a great question. I started out as a tag team actually called Thunder and Lightning with my good friend Clark Haynes. And but the Cobra thing was something that I just kind of came up with. But to be honest with you, I hadn't really thought out the whole gimmick that well. It was just kind of like a paramilitary kind of covert kind of guy. really wasn't based on the Sylvester Stallone thing. It was just kind of an idea I had. But again, I didn't really flesh it out that well. So, but I thought it was interesting. You know, I gave a dog tag off to a kid. I'd walk around, give him a little salute. So there was some interactive part with that. And I think it was an okay character. It's just, I really, again, didn't really think about the future or really the backstory or anything like that. And then they, of course, did a little angle with Pittman later. But I thought it was a decent character. I mean, I think it had some potential. Just at that time, you know, it was tough with the talent. There was lots of good talent in WCW, and it's where do you put them and how much TV time do they get and how to use this person. So, again, it was a decent character that just didn't really do that much with it.
Very cool. But you guys did, for that feud, which didn't last very long, a lot of people remember it because of him rappelling from the ceiling and the things that you guys did. That was, you know, way ahead of its time, or at least a couple years ahead of its time. It was pretty cool that you guys got the chance to, as newer guys, do those things.
Yeah, I think I was under the ring one night and came out from under the ring and attacked them and that kind of thing. So, yeah, it was fun. It was a character that again that could have done something, but you know, you have to have the right backing for those things to really work.
Absolutely. I remember my sister walked in the room one day and you had your green pants on, and she said, "Oh, that's Sting," and I said, "No, that's Cobra," and I thought, well, they kind of do look alike, so it made perfect sense that. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say that's exactly probably part of the reason why, you know, Eric Bischoff asked me, you know, to do the NWO thing, because, you know, Steve and I were probably similar sized. And, you know, so there was, you know, physically we looked relatively close, I think.
Absolutely. And you mentioned in a previous interview, like I said, I did my research, that you had a prosthetic made. And I'm trying to work out what kind of a prosthetic was made.
Well, they had an AFX guy, I think his name was Andre, and he was working for WCW. I think he was in Hollywood doing movie stuff, but he was doing a little side stuff with WCW. And they made a prosthetic. They took a mold of Steve's head, you know, his facial features, and then they took a mold of my head with the facial features, and then they made little prosthetics. His forehead brows, like his forehead were bigger. And of course, I had lighter eyes. He had dark eyes, so I wore contacts. I had this prosthetic little thing on my face to make it more like his face. And, you know, it would look pretty close, but with the paint, you really couldn't tell. So later we ended up dropping the prosthetics and just did with the paint. And it wasn't like, you know, nobody was looking at our skull features to see if they were matching. So I think we kind of dropped it out because we didn't need it. And the contacts, I mean, the contacts were terrible. I remember when I put them in, I've never worn contacts, so it was really difficult for me to, you know, see with those on, and when they'd move around in my eyes. And I remember when I jumped out to attack Lex, like, you know, one eye, contact went one way, I could barely see him, you know, but no one knew that part. But
you could have fooled me.
Not fun putting on the contacts.
No, I can't imagine. So when it was announced that the NWO was going in the Hall of Fame, people like me who, you know, lived for that stuff really thought of the original version of the NWO. And you were, like I said in the intro, part of the opening stages of it. And you kind of were part of really launching the biggest feud in NWO history, which was Hogan and Sting, by being the quote unquote, I think in the video games they put quotes around your name, Sting, the NWO Sting. So Let me ask you, what did you think of the character ultimately long term? And do you think that in WCW, not Japan, but in WCW, they could have maybe got more leverage out of it?
Absolutely. You know, the character I thought was great because it's like an evil, twin, you know, almost like Batman with a bad Batman or Spider-Man with a black Spider-Man or whatever you want to call them, where it's like the bad version of a superhero. And Sting was kind of a superhero. Now, this, of course, was none of my idea. You know, Bischoff came to me with this idea and wanted to do it, and actually told me if it gets out or leaks out, we're going to squash it. So, but absolutely, that could have been, in my opinion, you know, and again, it was above my pay grade for how they were going to use everything. Could have been a really interesting character. It could have, you know, messed things up for Sting for a long term. Then later they could be, you know, on the same team. Maybe they, fight together. It could be a Sting tag team. There could have been so many different ways to do it, you know. But,
yeah,
you know, again, it wasn't my decision.
Down the road, was that ever like discussed with when Sting went to TNA or anything? Like, let's do
You
something with.
know, nobody talked to me about it. At that point too, I mean, I had really, initially, of course, it was designed to fool everybody, but then it became its own bad, I intentionally, dressed differently. I never wore the singlet that he wore. I always wore just tights. I painted my face a little bit different with some extra lines, things like that, to try to differentiate. So it was obvious that it was not someone really trying to be Sting. It was someone who was trying to mock Sting and be a bad version of Sting.
What do you think? And I don't know if you've ever been asked this on an interview, but I got to tell you, I'm enjoying asking it. When they first released a Sting DVD, the guys in the photo department must have realized that there's a difference because you ended up on the back cover.
Yeah, I saw that.
What did you think of that? And did you get any royalties out of that deal?
No, of course, no royalties came my way. And, it's fine. I mean, it's funny because, in Japan, when I worked that character, the Japanese fans knew, that it was not Sting, that it was not Steve Borden, that it was the NWO Sting, that it was not him. And, it was definitely a totally different character. And I worked that character for years, like at least 2 or 3 years, easy, in Japan. And I worked hundreds of matches as NWO Sting over there. So, again, it was an established character in that country, but not in the U.S. at all. So it kind of ended up being something there, but, again, it wasn't utilized in the U.S. in that way whatsoever. So,
do you think that's why they included it in all the video games, like the NWO Sting character?
They might have, especially over there. And that picture, I think, was taken when I was in Japan. That was on the cover. That was a match I had in Japan. I think I had Hiro Saito in a little grip there. But
like a chin lock or something, yeah.
Yeah, it was like a trap hold or something.
Very cool, very cool. So you mentioned NWO Japan, and it was so big over there, but this was just before the internet kind of took down the borders, the barriers, and everybody could watch what they wanted. So if you were watching Japan in the U.S., you were getting it from tapes, tape trades and things like that.
Yeah.
So it wasn't as big of an audience. Do you keep up with it at all, with wrestling at all?
I really don't, to be honest with you. I really don't. I used to, when I got out of it, I watched it, and I'd get so frustrated at everything going on that because the business so well, it would just frustrate me, and so I wasn't fun for me to watch. So I kind of didn't watch it. So
yeah, I was going to ask if you had an opinion of the latest big stable over in Japan, which was the Bullet Club versus the NWO.
Yeah, I think they got a great, I say I don't watch it, but it means I don't watch it like on a regular basis. But, I wrestled Tanahashi, when he was a young kid, and, he's amazing. So, I saw that he won the heavyweight belt over there, the title, and he's an amazing talent. And, Chris Jericho is a friend of mine. I knew Chris Jericho from WCW. I know he's like back going again and doing stuff for there. I know they have some tremendous talent, and it's almost a resurgence of New Japan. I mean, Scott and I talk about when we were there with Muda and Chono and that whole group, and we really felt like it was, the pinnacle. And for us, I guess it was the pinnacle, for Japan at that point. But I really do think that they've got a really great crop of young talent now, and I think they're really doing a tremendous job. I mean, I see it. And again, as you mentioned, we were kind of doing in isolation. Like nobody saw us work unless you bought a tape or unless you, pirated tape or saw something. And now it's much easier for everybody to see these guys working over there. So I think it's definitely, broadened New Japan and made it a much more wider base for everybody. And that's great because there's some talented wrestlers in that company.
Very good. It seems like from talking to you that you had a better time in Japan than you did in WCW. Can I make that fair assessment?
Oh, for sure. I mean, in WCW, and it was a great experience for me, but, you never, there's lots of little cliques and lots of nepotism and things that were going on, and you didn't know whose side was what and what conflicts were going to happen. And in Japan, it was really just straightforward wrestling. Like I would get there to the arena, my name would be on the board who I was working, and basically, I didn't have to deal with any politics or any of that, and just got out there and worked. And it was great. And I really thrived under that environment, much more so than say the WCW. And it wasn't anybody's fault. It's just you had a lot of talent in WCW, and everybody's trying to get some TV time and TV spots, and it was just there's a lot of talent in there that we didn't have really enough space for, and so it was a different time.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I mentioned I kind of live for this stuff, and I really loved the NWO. I often credit it as being the catalyst for starting what became known as the Attitude Era. Now that they're going in the Hall of Fame, what do you think the legacy is for the original NWO?
I mean, I agree with you. I was so excited to be asked to be a part of it, and it's a thrill, and it was something I'll never forget. I mean, coming out, in the pay-per-view and as Sting, and everybody thought at Starcade, and it was everybody thought it was him, and the whole swerve and all that. I mean, it was just a great time in wrestling to be a part of that. I mean, the amount of attention that the NWO was able to generate, and from the fans, it was amazing. And those guys, and I credit to Hogan and Nash and Hall and everybody who was a part of that, and Bischoff and everybody who was a part of getting that started. It really was an amazing feat in professional wrestling to have one small group like that really kind of just make the sport and so popular.
Absolutely. Like I said, I grew up in New Jersey, which was traditionally WWF country, and I went to Madison Square Garden for Survivor Series 96, and I'll never forget, there was so many NWO shirts and NWO signs in the crowd for a company that did not have the NWO. And it just seemed like the biggest middle finger to to the WWF that this rebel company, this from down south, is much bigger than even the mecca of wrestling.
Yeah, I mean, there was definitely the wars going on between, WCW and the WWE, and it was, ratings wars and who was getting the most buys and all of that stuff. And it was a fun time because it was exciting because there was almost like this race, like a weapons race or something where who has the bigger guns and how can we, and it's good. It was good for the business. It was good for the boys. It was good. It was a good time to have that kind of, if you weren't happy with something, you had a little leverage to go to the other company maybe. And, I think that's kind of lost after, the demise of WCW. I think you lost a really, important competitor. It's like, McDonald's and Burger King, you need you just don't want to have only one choice, and I think that's kind of, although they absorbed some of the talent, it just was not the same, it's not the same program.
Absolutely not. And that's kind of my next question. I did already ask if you follow it, but what do you think of where we're at now with wrestling back on TNT with AEW and, definitely having, if not competition, an alternative to the WWE?
I think it's great. I think I started a long time ago, and there was territories, and wrestling was a lot different. It was more wrestling, a little more, like old school in a way. And I hate to say that. I know all the old school guys always say, "Oh yeah, I was old school, and we did this, and we were on the road, and we did that." And I think you have a tremendous opportunity today with social media. We didn't have the social media when I was in wrestling. So I think it's a tremendous opportunity to reach so many more people and to have, not just be, I mean, if you think about it, you only got time on TV to get your character kind of noticed or over or whatever you want to call it. Now with social media, you could follow somebody when they go home, when they go to the gym, when they're doing something else. And, that creates this kind of celebrity status that you couldn't attain. Only you could do that on television for a certain amount of time. That's the only way you got, your self over, so to speak. And now you can do it through social media. So it's a completely different, era for wrestling. And I think that's a plus.
Very good, very good. Well, I want to thank you for taking the time to do this. And before I let you go, I'll kind of give you a little bit of a I call it a popcorn question. Just any thoughts and anything you want to say to your fans out there? I appreciate all the fans that came out to see me and that were, supported the NWO when we did it. And I'm glad it was able to give them some entertainment value and fool them and whatever, and make everybody hate me and whatever that was. And it was, it was a fun time, and I was glad to be, even though I had a small role, it was definitely a role that I was, relished and was glad to be a part of. And,
congratulations to those guys going into the Hall of Fame, and I'm happy for them. And it was again just something I was glad to be a part of.
Oh, man. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time to do this. Like I said, I think you were a big part of it. Don't sell yourself short, because without that, I don't know if you would have had the Hogan Sting 1.5 year bill that we ended up getting.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
All right. Before I let you go, can I ask for one last favor from you?
Sure.
Do you mind if I ask for a station ID, just saying this is, you can say NWO Sting or Jeff Farmer, whatever you're happy you're saying, and you're listening to the Wrestling Epicenter?
Sure. This is the NWO Sting, and you are listening to the Wrestling Epicenter.
Like what you're hearing? Follow us on social media. We are on Facebook at facebook.com/Wrestling Epicenter, or just search Wrestling Epicenter in the search box on Facebook. On Twitter at W Epicenter. On YouTube at IWR Interactive. And of course, check us out at WrestlingEpicenter.com, your hub and home of all things professional wrestling interviews. We're the originals, and we love what we do.
Hey, it's Tony Schiavone, and you're listening to the Wrestling Epicenter. And I would stick around, but I'm desperately out of time.